so yeah, and so I guess we could start in from one of the things that makes the book so accessible is the glossary that you have at the beginning of your book, and some of the words that you use throughout the book. So in using the words underworld and spirit. So I don't know if you'd like to kind of elaborate what underworld and spirit means, and how those are used throughout the book as people are going through on their journeys.
Absolutely. Part of me initially, I was like, how exactly do I describe that in my introduction? I have a printed out version. I'm right here. Like, let me just check. But however, without flipping through pages, one of the things that I noticed most profoundly in addressing anything that feels dark or heavy in my own journey was that it took on this metaphorical, metaphysical, mythical context that felt like it could be most closely associated with the underworld, with what is down in the deep, dark recesses of the earth, because it's hidden, because it's unknown. And then as I began to explore my own spirituality at a young age, as you know, in my late teens, and I started to find a context for that. I started to find other groups, mostly pagan groups at that time, so people practicing earth-based traditions that had names for this sensation in this place, right? It was called the underworld, or it was called the lower world, or the lower realms. And it was believed that that's where we store our unresolved trauma, our pain, what we're afraid of, what we are doing our best not to be in relationship with, what we're ignoring, what we don't want to deal with. And as I went through my own healing process, whether that was the trauma of leaving home at a really young age or the trauma of my mother's homicide, it started to make more and more sense to me that there was this place that felt real, that held the landscape for what it was that I needed to deal with in my life. And through using the power of visualization or the power of my imagination, I could go into this space and address the mythic, because trauma feels so mythical. It's next to impossible to try to conceptualize it in the day-to-day. And that became really evident for me, is that that I needed a place that went beyond the norms of what we consider to be ordinary reality, because trauma doesn't feel ordinary. And we don't have the way our minds work, when we try and put everything into special compartments or concepts. Trauma doesn't fit into those boxes. I needed a place where it wasn't in a box. And so that's why in the book, I use the underworld as a reference point for us to name where our trauma is hanging out, and to give us a pathway or a map that we can actually create to move into it. And so that speaks to more of where we keep what is hidden, what we're afraid of, what we have deemed the dark. And as far as the word spirit with a capital S, I use the word spirit with a capital S as a reference for source, or for God, for goddess, for the universal energy, for the highest power, for creator, great spirit, any whatever name it is that feels right for whoever it is who's reading the book themselves, in acknowledgement that we are in partnership with this divine source at all times, because it's what we're made of. And when we acknowledge that we are in partnership with this divine source, it gives us a greater perspective and capacity, even Terry, I would say, to trust or have faith that we can move into the underworld. We can be with whatever it is that has shown up, even though we have no fucking idea how. Somehow there's a way to be with it. Somehow if we stop the craziness or the busyness of our mind and slow down and listen more to our bodies or to our hearts and find that sense of spirit within, we're guided in a good way of what is, sometimes it's just like literally second by second if we're in a more acute experience of trauma. But then as time passes, you know, maybe we're guided hour by hour, maybe we're guided day by day. You know, I know lately with the present experience of the pandemic, I have to do a lot of tuning in to get a sense of connection and a sense of guidance, because there's so much divisiveness and so much going on at once that those are the times where that connection to spirit is paramount.